All right, hello 12s. We're on to our next topic. I'm in the bunker of science, the bunker of biology. And we're talking about the circulatory system. What is the circulatory? We've got this complex, amazing thing inside our body called the circulatory system. What is its job? What does it do? What's it for? Well, remember previously we were talking about digestion. You ate food, and you chewed it up, you broke it down, and you broke it down into biomolecules. And then you absorb those biomolecules into your body. It finally makes it into your body in the small intestine. And when we talked about when it makes it into the body, we saw those villi, those little finger-like projections on the inside of your small intestine to increase surface area. And inside those villi were microvilli, specialized cells for transporting biomolecules into the body. And when you saw there in those villi, there were capillaries in those villi. Well, those capillaries are part of the circulatory system. And there was something called a lacteal, which was part of the lymphatic circulatory system. All of those things are part of the circulatory system. Capillaries, those lacteals. And so one major role of the circulatory system is to take those delicious, wonderful biomolecules, those carbohydrates, amino acids, nucleic acids, and fatty acids and lipids, and to take them, to transport them throughout your body to all the cells that need it. We are large. We can't rely on diffusion for those biomolecules to diffuse through our body. They have to be transported there. Smaller, more basic organisms like flatworms and whatever, those awful roundworms, flatworms, they can use diffusion. But if you start to get a little bit too big, remember we talked about this, the surface area to volume equation that ratio starts to change, and there's just too much volume for diffusion to work fast enough, for metabolism to work fast enough. So you need a circulatory system to take those biomolecules and to send them, because even the little cell up here on the top of your pinky needs those carbohydrates, needs nucleic acids, needs amino acids, needs fatty acids, needs all those things to build new structures, to do metabolism, to break things down for energy. All of those things need to happen even in the cell out here. So the circulatory system extends all the way out here to your pinky. So that's job number one, is taking those biomolecules, taking nutrients, and delivering them to all the cells of your body. Now, then your cells are going to metabolize all of that stuff, all those biomolecules. They can break them down, alter them, change them, and that's going to produce waste. The breakdown of nucleic acids, the breakdown of amino acids produces ammonia, which is extremely toxic, in addition to other things. And so your circulatory system has to, another job is to transport wastes out to parts of the body where those wastes can be excreted, can be sent out. So to your kidneys, to your liver, to the organs that do waste management. Your circulatory system also, sometimes part of your body needs to talk to another part of your body. It doesn't want to use the nervous system. So it will send hormones, it'll send signaling proteins, things like that. Those travel through your circulatory system, right? Hormones travel through your circulatory system and then activate different regions of your DNA and target tissues, and you do other stuff. Mainly, a lot of these hormones come from your brain, from the pituitary glands in your brain. So another thing for your circulatory system to do is to communication, transport. You also, metabolizing these biomolecules requires the presence of oxygen. And this is the main thing that we, of course, associate with the circulatory system, is carrying oxygen to all the cells in your blood. And yes, true enough, that is another role of the circulatory system, is to transport oxygen to all the cells. And then that oxygen, the metabolism, the oxidation of carbohydrates and other things produces carbon dioxide. So another role of your circulatory system is to transport. Carbon dioxide is toxic to cells, so to take all that carbon dioxide and transport it again to the organs that will process and get rid of it, which in our case is the lungs. You will breathe that carbon dioxide out. We're not done with the roles of the circulatory system. This is a large unit. Another role of the circulatory system is, since it is spread out throughout your entire body, it touches almost every cell in your body, is close to a part of the circulatory system. Why not use it for immunology, for the immune? It's a major part of your immune system. So white blood cells patrol the circulatory system. They patrol the lymphatic circulatory system. That's part of the your circulatory system, and they patrol the blood, looking for invaders, looking for foreign cells, and getting rid of them when needed. So another role of your circulatory system is part of your immune system. And another thing that your circulatory system can do, so since it's carrying molecules, and it's carrying food and carrying wastes and stuff, and it's spread throughout your body, your immune system dissolves these things in water. A lot of your circulatory system, a lot of your blood is actually water. And water is really good at retaining heat. And so another role of your circulatory system is homeostasis, is maintaining homeostasis. Sending hot blood to places or keeping hot blood away from places is how your body helps to control temperature, a major part. We're going to be talking about that. So maintaining homeostasis, and if you recall, homeostasis is the conditions in which cells can function. So 37.5 degrees and a pH, slight tiny basic, mainly neutral pH. So that's what we're going to be talking about in this unit. Now, at the heart of the immune system, at the center of the circulatory system, is the heart. So let's talk about the heart. That's what this video is going to focus on. We're going to talk about the heart, the anatomy of the heart. So what is the heart? The heart is the pump that circulates, that powers the circulatory system, that sends blood coursing through your arteries and your veins. And so this organ, this heart, is basically a big muscle. It's made of cardiac muscle, which is a special kind of muscle. So we have smooth muscle, we have skeletal muscle, and we have cardiac muscle. And basically cardiac muscle, cardiac muscle beats on its own. It can beat on its own, but we have regulation of the heart. There is a pacemaker that regulates the heart. What else? What do we say about the heart? So, let's talk about the structures here in the heart. What we have. This is called the septum. It divides the heart in two. And so we have a right side of the heart and a left side of the heart. Now you might say, Mr. K, you've got that backwards. You're pointing at the left side and calling it the right side. Well, no. We call this the right side of the heart because for this lovely person with this 70s haircut, this is the right side. So we name the sides, we call the sides from the point of view of the person involved. So this person, this is always the right side of the heart. This is always the left side of the heart. And we humans have a 4-chambered heart. Reptiles have a 2-chambered heart or 3-chambered heart. And so the chambers are the right atrium, the right ventricle, the left atrium, the left ventricle. And what happens is blood sans oxygen enters here, it pours in. This big blood vessel here is called the vena cava. This is the superior vena cava. This is the inferior vena cava. So this is deoxygenated blood coming from your legs, from the lower parts of your body, from the organs down here, your digestive system. This is used up blood. It's coming back here, and here blood is coming from your brain and from your arms and from this your upper part of your body. deoxygenated blood, and it pours in and it fills up the right atrium. Now, to make sure, while it's filling up the right atrium, there is a valve here, an atrioventricular valve, and this is called the tricuspid valve. And this valve separates the atrium from the right atrium from the right ventricle. Once the right atrium is full, the atrium contract. Both atria will contract at the same time. We'll see that because there's blood in here. There's blood constantly in this system. So this the atrium will contract. That will force this valve open, and blood now pours into the right ventricle. And the right ventricle, the ventricles are larger than the atria, and the muscles here, you can see the walls here are thicker around the ventricles because the muscles are stronger. They pump harder. This is the main. The atria are just getting the blood into the ventricle. The ventricles are getting the blood out. And so the right ventricle, there is another valve here. While it's filling up, this valve is closed. So while this is contracting, this valve opens, this valve is closed. The ventricle fills up with blood. This valve closes, this valve opens. This is called the pulmonary valve. And this ventricle, the right ventricle contracts and sends blood out along the pulmonary artery. This is the pulmonary artery. It sends blood out. There's the right and the left pulmonary arteries, and the blood goes out and it goes to the lungs. So the right ventricle, the right side of the heart, takes deoxygenated blood and sends it out to the lungs. And in the lungs, we're going to learn about this, but gas exchange happens. We drop off carbon dioxide, we pick up oxygen, and now we have oxygenated blood that is coming back from the lungs via the right and left pulmonary veins, and into it comes back in the pulmonary veins, and it enters the left ventricle, left atrium. And into the left atrium it goes. It fills up the left atrium. There is another valve here, an atrioventricular valve. This is not a tricuspid valve. It's a bicuspid valve. Basically, these valves, bicuspid, it's also called the mitral valve. They have doors, and it only open one way. A tricuspid valve, all of these valves, all the valves, the pulmonary valve, this atrioventricular valve, and this, what's called the aortic valve, are all tricuspid valves, which means they have 3 doors. Let me show you what does that mean? What does that look like? Can we zoom in on there? Can you see that? There it is. 3 doors. They have 3 doors. So if you're looking at the valve, it's got 3 doors. And they only open one way. And the valves are there to make sure that you don't have backflow, that the blood is always traveling the right way. So when the ventricles are contracting, the atrioventricular valves are shut so that blood doesn't go backwards into the atria. So we're filling up now the left atrium. Once it's full, the muscles around it contracting the left atrium, and blood passes the bicuspid atrioventricular valve. So this valve is different. This is the only one that's bicuspid. I'll tell you in a second why it's different. And then the left ventricle fills up with blood, and this valve closes. The atrioventricular valve closes. The mitral valve closes, and the left ventricle contracts. And the aortic valve opens, and blood goes squirting out of the aorta, and it goes up to the head and up to the arms and out into the body and out into all the tissues and out into every single capillary, every single cell, everywhere. The blood goes out, and it is pushed all the way into every single corner of your body. Even in here somewhere, there's little capillaries inside your ear, the top of the head, the top of the nose, every single capillary in your body. Now, that requires a lot of power to send blood into all those little nooks and crannies of your body. And so actually, you can't see it on this diagram, but left ventricle, the muscles here are really strong, and this is a really powerful squeeze, a really strong, powerful contraction. As a result, the valve that keeps the flow from going backwards into this atrium has to be extra hardened so that it doesn't open the wrong way, it doesn't open backwards. And so this valve, it is thought that is why this valve only has 2 doors. It's easier to keep 2 doors closed than it is to keep 3 doors closed. These valves, the atrioventricular valves also, so this one here and this one here, the ones that separate the atrium from the ventricles, are also anchored by something called chordae tendineae. Chordae tendineae. And basically what these are your heartstrings. Oh, isn't that lovely? And what they do is, let's see if I can find again the chordae tendineae. I have a picture of them. There it is. Can I zoom in on that? Will it work? Yes. Ooh, that's gross. So this is a ventricle, and you can see these are the chordae tendineae, and they are attached. They're in the ventricle. They're attached to the back of this valve. These valves here are in the open position, but imagine they were closed, and this is the ventricle here, and these chordae tendineae hold these flaps, and they actually have a muscle on them. So when the atrium contract, these chordae, the atrioventricular valves open and let blood in, and then they close. And when the ventricle contracts, the force is so strong it wants to push those atrioventricular valves to open the wrong way and have backflow, but the chordae tendineae hold those doors closed. That's their job, is when the ventricle contracts, it prevents backflow from happening and those atrioventricular valves opening. So, ventricle contracts. This structure here, this is called the aorta. This is an artery, the aortic artery, the aortic arch. It's a huge thing. If you have sometimes people, there's so much power here that actually this is like this is strong connective tissue holding this all together, but it can stretch and people actually blow out their aorta. You don't want that to happen, and they get a fake aorta. You can have a fake if your aorta is jiggly, is loose. You can get a fake aorta, a plastic aorta put in. So that's the path of the blood. That's the path of the blood. Deoxygenated blood into the right atrium, past the atrioventricular valve, into the right ventricle, then past the pulmonary valve, along the pulmonary artery, into the lungs, coming back via the pulmonary vein, into the left ventricle, past the bicuspid atrioventricular valve or the mitral valve, into the left ventricle, then from the left ventricle past the aortic valve into the aorta and out into the body. Now you'll notice our heart does basically a double pump of blood. We go lub-dub, 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 double pump. And we have 2 circuits that the blood does. The first circuit is serviced here by the right side of the heart, and that's called the pulmonary circuit. So we go out to the lungs. The pulmonary means lungs, and back from the lungs. So the blood does 1 circuit to get oxygenated. Then the second circuit is the systemic circuit. We call this the systemic circuit, and it is serviced by the left side of the heart. And so blood goes out into the systems, into the body, where oxygen and nutrients and stuff are used up and wastes are picked up. And then it comes back again to the right atrium. So that's the systemic circuit and the pulmonary circuit. So, and the reason we have 2, and some animals like fish have a single chamber heart or 2-chamber heart. I don't remember now. It's been a while since I've taught Life Sciences 11. But we have, number one, this having a 4-chamber heart and having 2 circuits, you always keep deoxygenated blood from mixing with oxygenated blood. So when your blood is oxygenated, all the blood is oxygenated. It's extremely efficient. We are energy hungry We need to be efficient because mammals, we have a huge brain. We're always thinking. We're doing stuff. We're getting exhausted. We're running around. We're killing things. We're eating things. We're mating. We're punching. We're fighting. We're doing stuff. So we cannot have some deoxygenated blood flowing, going in the wrong way. That would not be efficient. So this way we keep oxygenated and deoxygenated blood totally separate. The other reason is we need lub-dub, we need to do it twice, is because when the blood goes, for example, to the arteries, when it goes to the lungs, it goes through the little capillaries, it goes into all the tiny little capillaries, and when you add up the cross-section of all the little capillaries, it's actually much greater than of the veins and arteries in your body. We'll talk about vessels in another video, but and so so basically if you add up all the arteries, let's say there's this much artery. If you lumped all the arteries together, the cross section would be this big. When you add up all the capillaries, it's this big. So when you go from actually a smaller tube to a larger cross section, pressure drops. And you don't regain that pressure. So that means when you send the blood to the lungs, the pressure drops from the heart. And then you wouldn't have enough pressure to send it out if you just had a two-chambered heart, to have enough pressure to send it out to your giant body, to the rest of your system. So you need another pump, basically. Your pumps are two combined to pump it and get the pressure back up. And send stuff to the systems with enough pressure, be able to make it to your brain. Okay, so we talked about the valves. We talked about the path of the blood. Let's talk, what else we need to talk about? So we talked about that. We talked about the path of the blood. So you can review, this diagram is in your notes. You can review, go through, understand the path of the blood, where blood goes, where is it deoxygenated, where is it oxygenated, where are the veins and where are the arteries? And then next, and we talked about the systemic versus the pulmonary circuits. We talked about the valves. So there are 4 valves. And so you've got the atrioventricular valves, which are between the atrium and the ventricle. One of them, the one on the left side, is a bicuspid valve. It's got 2 doors instead of a tricuspid valve with 3 doors. The semilunar valves, as they're known, are the valves that lead out from the ventricles. So the one going, the pulmonary, the pulmonary valve, which heads to the lungs, and the aortic valve, which leads to the systems, to the rest of your body. Let's talk about, well, it's all part of this unit. So let's talk about the cardiac cycle. So how does your heart beat? We have somewhere here, let's see, there is a link animation of the heart beating. Let's see if we can open, oh, that's not what we want. Let's see here, let's open that link here. Give me that link, so I can show you how the heart beats. Hold on a second. Okay, so here we go. So here's the heart. Right atrium, right ventricle, left ventricle, right atrium. So what happens is, your heart will beat on its own, but it also receives signals from your brain, from your medulla oblongata. What your medulla oblongata does is it can detect when there is too much carbon dioxide in your blood. It has chemoreceptors. It's linked up to some chemoreceptors. And so when there's too much carbon dioxide, that tells your medulla oblongata, oh, there is bad stuff. Remember, carbon dioxide is toxic. And you would have more carbon dioxide in your blood because you are metabolizing more sugars. You're metabolizing more biomolecules. So in the presence of oxygen. So when you exercise, you're getting all your cells working. The necessity for energy goes up. And so you do more metabolism and you produce more carbon dioxide. So your medulla oblongata is like, hey, there's more carbon dioxide. We need to pump the heart more to get rid of that carbon dioxide. And this in turn will bring more biomolecules and more oxygen to those cells, to those muscle cells that need it. Now, so what it does is it sends along the vagus nerve, it sends a signal to your heart. And in your heart, there is something called the SA node. And it is a special little bit of muscular nervous tissue, and it is connected by that vagus nerve to your medulla oblongata. It is somewhere in the right atrium. It's in the right atrium, the SA node. And when it gets that signal from the medulla oblongata, the SA node will send a signal to start contracting the atrium. And it is here, it's not like there's this atrium and there's this, it's behind this, it's in there, like this is the aorta, it's in the way here on this diagram. But the SA node is somewhere down there, and it actually will send the signal across here to contract both atria together. Now, you may have in a movie or in a TV show seen like the beep, 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 beep. In the hospital, you know, there's the person, they declare their love for somebody and then they beep. So that is called a cardiogram, and that describes the electrical activity of the heart. And so we're going to talk about the cardiogram here because there is a cardiogram here. So what happens, here's the electrocardiogram. And there's the electrocardiogram. Now, it's weird in this model, but the first, you know, it goes beep, 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 beep. So the first beep is here, it's split up. That's called the P wave or the P curve. And that is when the atria contract. So if you're looking at a cardiogram and you see that first little bump, that's the P, that is when the atria are contracting. So let's see if we can make the atria contract here, and we can see if I can do it really slowly. Okay, so there we go. So it's moving across the P wave. The atria are starting to contract. If I can do it, look at that, it's working. The atria are contracting. Blood is moving from the atria into the ventricles and filling up the ventricles. And now we're at the start of this big thing. It's the QRS complex. And the QRS complex is the electrical activity of the ventricles now. This is going to be the ventricles contracting. That's the second sort of stage of this. Now, what's been happening here in the SA node, so the SA node, it's known as the pacemaker because it sets the pace for this. So medulla oblongata sends a signal, SA node, do your thing, SA node. So the SA node, it's nervous tissue, it sends a signal, the atria contract, that's that P wave that you saw. The atria contract. At the same time, the SA node, so it sent a signal for the atria to contract, but it also sent a signal down this way through the center of the heart to another node that is down here at the bottom, and that is called the AV node. The AV node. And the atrioventricular node. And the AV node, now the timing, this takes just the right amount of time. This signal traveling from the SA node to the AV node takes the same amount of time as the ventricles or the atrium are contracting. So the atrium are contracting, this signal is traveling down to the AV node. When the atria have finished contracting, the AV node fires at that point. The atriums start relaxing. And what happens is the AV node, the ventricles are so large across the surface, there's so much muscle here. You imagine this is all encased in muscle, and it's thick muscle. But there's actually nerves that run along this muscle from the AV node. They're called Purkinje fibers. And they coordinate the contraction of the ventricles. So now what's happening is, so here we go, it's a huge amount of electrical activity just because the surface area, there's so much muscle here. So let's see if we can do that really slow here. If you guys can see it from over there, I think you can. So here we go, and so now we are starting, if we look, we're starting the contraction, the ventricles are contracting. and they contract sort of from the bottom up. They squeeze. And these valves, the atrioventricular valves, as the atria are relaxing, these slam shut. As the pressure goes up in here, it slams them, closes them shut even more. It opens these valves, the semilunar valves. So this is these valves, the aortic valve and the pulmonary valve are opened, and blood is squirted out into the system. So there we go, and out it goes, out of the heart, off. There we go. The blood is going out. There's a link for this. You can do this in slow-mo. There's a link for this in the notes. I recommend you play with it. And then the last thing is this T curve, and the T curve is the electrical activity now resetting. So once nerves fire, once those SA node, AV node fires, all the nerves have to reset. Everybody's got to reset, and that is sort of the relaxing, resetting portion of activity. So you start with the P wave. That's the atria contracting. The QRS complex, that's the ventricles contracting, and then there's a recovery period. And it all looks like this. Watch. Boom, blood, and then squirts out, and then goes, and then squirts out. Okay, now, some things to notice. So the atria and the ventricles are both contracting at the same time. You can see here, this is actually blood pressure. So you can see this is showing blood pressure, blood volume, ventricular, atrial, aortic, atrial. So you can see blood pressure goes up and then down and then up and down. And you may have had your blood pressure measured. I have to have my blood pressure measured all the time because Mr. K is sort of a, I don't know, high energy sort of person. So I have really high blood pressure, essentially, is the problem. And so I have my blood pressure tested all the time. And when you've had your blood pressure tested, you may have noticed that there are two numbers. There's a higher number and a lower number. And those numbers are called the systolic and the diastolic pressure. And what your blood pressure is measuring is what those numbers are regulated by is the contraction of the ventricles, okay? The ventricles, not the atria, just the ventricles. And so what blood pressure is how hard is the blood in your arteries pressing against the walls of the arteries. You don't want it to be too low because then it's not going to make it up to your brain, and that's a problem. That's why if you're lying down, your blood pressure drops because your heart doesn't, your body doesn't have to work that hard because you're lying down, so your blood sort of flows to your head easily. So your blood pressure drops. And then when you stand up really fast, you may have felt like all of a sudden woozy, and that's because it takes a moment for your blood pressure to catch up. It's your medulla oblongata that controls how hard your heart is pumping or how fast your heart is pumping, so maintaining that blood pressure. And so it takes a moment for it to catch up. And so if you stand up really fast, you won't have enough blood pressure to send blood to your brain, and you will immediately start to pass out. Your brain is like a huge draw on energy. Humans, that's all we got. We don't have huge fangs. We're not really that strong. We just got a brain. We think out of problems. That's the only way we solve problems. We think about it. If your blood pressure is too high, that's called hypertension. You have all these little arterioles and all these little capillaries inside your brain and all throughout your body, and they're very thin and they're very tiny, and if the blood pressure is too hard, it can rip them open, and your blood vessels explode in your brain, and that causes a stroke. So that's why we have this epidemic of high blood pressure. I'm part of that epidemic, and nobody knows why I actually have high blood pressure, but whatever. So high blood pressure can be dangerous. So check yourself for high blood pressure. It should be 120 over 80. And so what does that mean? The 120 is when the ventricles are contracted. So that's the blood pressure is at its highest because it's getting squeezed out through into the veins. And then when the ventricles relax, that's that lower number, 80. So my blood pressure is something like 135, 140 over 90 something, which is bad. So that relaxed blood pressure tells you how much blood you have, how hard when you're supposed to be relaxed, when your ventricles are relaxed, that blood pressure isn't supposed to be that high. Systolic blood pressure, that's that first number, the high number, the 120 is what it should be, is when the ventricles are in systole. There's the word systole, can you see that? And that means they're contracted. The diastolic blood pressure, that lower number, is when they're in diastole, when they're relaxed. So there they are relaxing, and that's diastole, and that's the lower blood pressure. So that's, and let's just one more look at the cardiac cycle here. One more look. Let me just find the cardiac cycle. Here we go. And there it is. That's what I want to see, is the cardiac cycle. So if we look at the cardiac cycle, so signal from medulla oblongata, signals the SA node. And so the SA node, one signal goes to the right and left atrium to contract. Another signal goes, and it takes a long time for that signal to get to the AV node. By that time, the ventricles are full. The atrium have finished their contraction. The ventricles are now full of blood. Now the AV node triggers. That signal just took that is timed perfectly to hit the AV node, and it sends the signal via the Purkinje fibers for the ventricles to contract. The valves, the correct valves, shut. The atrioventricular valves shut, and as the ventricles are contracting, the semilunar valves open, and blood shoots out where it's supposed to go, to the lungs and to the systemic circuit. Now, another thing that will start the cardiac cycle is that the atria have stretch receptors, and if the atriums get overstretched, they will contract and start this. If something goes wrong here, this actually can screw up. So this timing gets messed up or something. That's when you have irregular heartbeat, and you know, you might have a heart attack that way. And sometimes that happens when, you know, your heart is starved for oxygen. There may be a congenital defect. My friend, when he was in his 30s, had a heart attack and almost died because he has a defect. And so as a result, he wears a pacemaker. He's been wearing a pacemaker for years now. It's a metal object that sits inside his chest, and it is connected to the SA node, and it will shock him if he gets the things get all out of line. It will actually shock him to start things again. You know when you see the people, they do that defibrillator thing, they're like, clear. What that does is it doesn't power the heart or start the heart or something like that. It doesn't do that. So when you have a heart attack, these things, so the atrium and the ventricles and the timing gets all screwed up, and now these guys are frozen and things aren't working the right way. It's not pumping blood where it needs to go. What a defibrillator does is it wipes out all of the electrical activity. It's like it just nukes everything here. Wipes all of this clean. And so the hope is that what that will do is restart things. It's like turning the computer off and turning it on again. That's what a defibrillator does. Okay. That's a 40-minute video, but there's a lot of stuff in this thing. So here we go. That is the first section of the circulatory system. In the next one, we'll talk about blood vessels.